Good day, I am Christine Di Marukot and today I will discuss the production processes of beer, wine, and distilled spirits. Here's the overview of the topics. First, let us go to fermentation. Fermentation is the main process in the making of alcoholic beverages. It is a metabolic process in which the starch or sugar is converted into alcohol or acid. Fermentation occurs in microorganisms such as bacteria, which is responsible for converting sugar into lactic acid, and fungi like yeast, which converts sugar into alcohol. There are two types of fermentation, the lactic acid fermentation and ethanol or alcohol fermentation. We will just focus on ethanol fermentation since our topic is about the alcoholic beverages. Here is the overall reaction of the ethanol fermentation, in which the glucose is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide. In here, glucose is firstly converted into two molecules of pyruvate. For this reaction to occur, two molecules of ADP and 2-phosphate is needed, and this process releases 2 ATP. At the same time, NAD+ is converted into NADH. Pyruvate is then converted into acetaldehyde and carbon dioxide is released in this reaction. The acetaldehyde is then converted into ethanol, in which NADH is converted back to NAD+. Here is the brief differences of beer, wine, and distilled spirits. Beer is made from grains with 2 to 8% alcohol content. Wine is from fruits with 8 to 14% alcohol content, and distilled spirits are made from either grains or fruits with other ingredients and has a 40 to 50% alcohol content or sometimes higher. Now, let us go to the beer. Beer and allied products are beverages of low alcoholic content made by brewing various grains, usually barley, which is converted into malt to proceed with the brewing process. There are 4 raw materials that are used in beer making. Beer is composed mostly of water. Malt is a grain which is malted which provides color, aroma, flavor, and body to every ale and lager, which is the types of beer, and can set each beer apart. Hops are added to add flavor and preserve the beer. It contributes to the bitterness that we taste in the beer. And lastly, yeasts are added in fermentation process to convert sugar into alcohol. Here is the diagram of the production of beer. For more information about the process, refer to these links. Beer making process consists of malting, milling, mashing, lautering, boiling, whirlpooling, cooling, fermentation, maturation, filtration, and packaging. The first process in beer making is malting. Most brewers just buy finished malt from suppliers rather than making their own because malting itself requires several days of effort. Malting is a process in which raw barley or another grain is made ready to become the main ingredient in the brewing process. There are 3 steps of malting. The grain is steeped in water, then rested under precise conditions to encourage germination, and finally dried in a kiln or a roaster. First is steeping, in which grains are immersed in water and is spread out on floors as we can see in the picture on the right, or in special compartments and regularly turned over for from 5 to 8 days. The layers being gradually thinned as the germination proceeds. The absorbed water activates naturally existing enzymes and stimulates the grain to develop new enzymes. The second step is to continue the germination process that started in steeping. Here, growth and modification of the grain occurs. From the outside of the grain, as we can see in the picture on the right, rootlets emerge from the grain, and within the outer husk, a shoot grows. During growth, oxygen is absorbed, carbon dioxide is given off, and the enzyme diastase is formed. This enzyme is the biological catalyst that changes the dissolved starch into the disaccharide maltose, which, after transformation into the monosaccharide glucose by maltase, is directly fermentable by yeast. At the proper time, when the enzymes are formed, growth is arrested by heat. The third and final step in the malting process is drying or kilning. Convection heat treatment dries the malt to prevent further germination. If germination continued, the grain would keep growing and all of the starch reserves needed by the brewer would be used by the growing plant. After malting, the malt will be crushed into smaller particles. This is called milling. The various milling processes need to be manipulated carefully to find a balance between a grind that is too fine and one that is too coarse. The design of the mill and the gap between the rolls are important in obtaining the correct reduction in size of the malt. This is the milling process in the flowchart in the Book of Shreve. The next step is mashing. Mashing is the extraction of the valuable constituents of malt, malt adjuncts, and sugar by maceration of the ground materials with hot water. Maceration is softening or breaking into pieces using a liquid. And then, it is treated with water to prevent too high pH, which would tend to make a dark beer. This process is carried out in the mash tub, and the insoluble starch is converted into liquefied starch and the soluble malt starch into dextrin and malt sugars. Here is the mashing process. After all the required ingredients have been dissolved from the brewing materials, the entire mash is run from the mash tub, filter presses, or the lauter tub, where the wort is separated from the insoluble spent grains through a slotted false bottom and run into the copper wort cooker. For complete recovery of all substances in solution, sparging is utilized, in which the carbonated water is rained through the grains. The wort is then cooked for approximately 1 to 1.5 hours, during part of which it is in contact with hops. The purpose of boiling is to concentrate the wort to the desired strength, to sterilize it and destroy all the enzymes, to coagulate certain proteins by heat by approximately 82 degrees Celsius, to modify its malty odor, and to extract the hop resine's tannin and aroma from the hops, which are added during the cooking process. At the end of the time, the spent hops are separated from the boiling wort very quickly in a whirlpool separator. After whirlpooling, the wort is then ready to be cooled. The cooling step is not only to reduce the temperature but also to allow the wort to absorb enough air to facilitate the start of fermentation. The wort is then cooled in a plate heat exchanger up to 48 degrees Celsius and then aerated. This operation is performed under controlled conditions to prevent contamination by wild yeasts. Frequently, sterilized air is used. The next step is fermentation. The cold wort is mixed with selected yeasts in the line leading to the starting tubs. Yeast converts the sugary wort into beer by producing alcohol, a wide range of flavors, and carbon dioxide. This is the fermenter tank in which fermentation occurs. The yeast gradually settles to the bottom of the fermenting tanks in about 7 to 10 days. As the beer leaves the fermenters, it contains in suspension hop resins, insoluble nitrogenous substances, and a fair amount of yeast. It is then sent to the lagering or aging tanks, where usually a second fermentation occurs. the temperature is kept high enough to initiate the second fermentation and then is cooled to 0 to 2 degrees Celsius to lager the beer. Lagering consists of storing at 0 to 2 degrees Celsius for up to 4 months. During this time, the taste and aroma are improved and tannins, proteins, and hop resins are removed by settling. Highly hopped beers require more lagering time than beers containing less hops. After maturation, draft beer is filtered through fine membranes, usually by ultrafiltration, which remove residual yeast cells, harmful bacteria, and other impurities. And lastly, the beer is ready for packaging. Beer is packaged into bottles and/or cans. If bottled, the beer is counter-pressure filled to reduce oxidation and capped on foam to ensure it is free of any nasty microbes and will remain stable in the bottle. Bottles or cans are then labeled. Now let us go to wine. Wine is a fermented fruit juice which is usually made from grapes and has 8 to 14% alcohol content. The raw materials in making wine are the following: water, fruit, which is usually grapes, sugar, which is optional, increased alcohol content, and yeast that facilitates fermentation process. These are the classifications of wine: true color, carbon dioxide pressure, and alcohol content. Here is the diagram of the production of wine. For more information about the process, refer to these links. The wine-making process is harvesting, destemming and crushing, fermentation, clarification and aging, and then bottling. Harvesting or picking is certainly the first step in the actual wine-making process. Harvesting can be done by hand or by machines. However, many of the winemakers prefer to do it by hand as machines are known to negatively affect the grapes and the vineyard. Along with the traditional tasting method, deciding when to harvest the grapes also requires a fair bit of science because the moment at which the grapes are picked from the vineyard is what actually determines the sweetness, flavor, and acidity of the wine. Weather also plays an important role. Rain can bloat the grapes, diluting the sugar and aromatic concentration levels, leading to the detriment of the wine's quality. If the growing season is extremely warm, all sorts of problems can occur. The grapes can dry out and become overripe. Once grapes are picked, they are taken to winery and are then sorted in bunches. Underripe and rotten grapes are removed. Once the grapes are sorted in bunches, now it is the time to destem and crush them. This crushing process used to be done by feet in the past. However, majority of the winemakers now do this crushing process mechanically. Mechanical pressing has also improved the quality and longevity of wine while reducing the winemaker's need for preservatives. The grapes are crushed and is turned into must, which is the fresh grape juice which contains solids, skins, and seeds of the grapes. If white wine is being made, then the seeds, solids, and skins are quickly separated from the grape juice to prevent the tannins and color from leaching in the wine. On the other hand, if red wine is being made, the seeds, solids, and skins are allowed to stay in contact with the juice to allow the juice to get additional tannins, flavor, and color. Crushing and pressing is followed by the fermentation process. Must naturally starts fermenting within 6 to 12 hours when wild yeast is added to it, but many winemakers add cultured yeast instead of wild yeast to the must to predict the final outcome and ensure consistency. Fermentation continues until all the sugar is transformed into alcohol, resulting in the production of dry wine. Sometimes, modifications are made in wine. If you want a sweet wine, fermentation is halted in between to prevent entire sugar from converting. If you want to increase the alcohol content of the wine, chaptalization or addition of sugar, usually beet or cane sugar, is utilized. Temperature control during alcoholic fermentation is necessary to facilitate yeast growth, extract flavors and colors from the skin, permit accumulation of desirable byproducts, and prevent undue rise in temperature, killing the yeast cells. The entry of air is restricted to prevent oxidation, while the carbon dioxide formed from the fermentation is released. The total fermentation process can take about a week to a month and even more. After fermentation, clarification and aging takes place. For this, the wine is transferred into stainless steel tanks or oak barrels. Clarification is a process where the suspended matter which will cause the wine to appear cloudy is removed. Wine undergoes natural clarification by gravity, which causes the leftover yeast and grape particles like seeds settle at the bottom of the storage vessel. The wine is then racked or siphoned into a new container, leaving the unwanted materials behind. There are various clarification methods that are used, including fining. An example is adding egg whites to wine, which will bind the tiny particles, sinking them to the vessel. Another is filtration and flotation. Wines are usually aged in wooden containers made of oak, others are in stainless steel tanks. During the aging period, various components of the wine form complex compounds affecting flavor and aroma. Duration of aging can take up to months or years depending on the quality. Before bottling, wine may require another clarification, filtration, and preservatives, usually sulfur dioxide, to combat microbe development. The final step of winemaking is bottling or packaging. Wine is kept in dark bottles to prevent the light from deteriorating the flavor of the wine. Bottles are closed with either screw caps or corks. Screw cap is used for standard wines and corks for wines that will be aged in bottles. For the spirits, we have 6 types: brandy, gin, vodka, rum, tequila, and whiskey, which differs from sources such as grains, fruits, plants, or a combination, and differs from alcoholic content. We have this diagram of the production of whiskey. And these are the links to the videos for more information. As we can see in the process, distilled spirits making is slightly the same with the making of the beer and wine, except for the distillation. So we will not dwell about the other processes anymore, as it was the same as the 2 alcohols. In alcohol fermentation, we cannot get higher alcohol content because yeasts cannot survive in high levels of alcohol. That is why distillation is done to concentrate the liquid and get a higher alcohol content. Distillation can be typically done in 2 ways, either in a pot still on the top right picture or a continuous column still, the bottom right picture. Each particular distillation process will influence its flavor and body. The difference in the boiling points of alcohol and water is utilized to separate these liquids from each other. As for the aging, vodka, most gins, and some rums and brandies are unaged. Aged products are predominantly whiskeys and most rums and brandies. Blending is an optional process. Usually, whiskey is the one that is blended to enhance the flavor, color, and the spirit.